Hey everyone, this is Nick and welcome to this new year 2024 with the first Linux and open source news video of the year. So this week we have more distributions working on optimizing their packages for newer CPUs, some leaving older computers behind and some taking a more considerate approach. We have Linux reaching about 4% market share on the desktop, which is pretty huge, and we have GNOME working on an official extension that I will admit completely baffles me. So let's dive in, but first let me remind you that if you like the channel and you like these videos, you can actually support it. I have a Patreon page and you have YouTube memberships as well. Both of them will give you the right to vote on the topics I cover on the channel. You'll also get a weekly Patreon cast where I talk about the channel, the sponsors, my ethics, open source and Linux in general, and you'll get a daily podcast about the Linux and open source news every day from Monday to Friday, 5 to 10 minute stops, a little audio show to get you caught up without having to wait for the end of the week. So if you're interested, click the link in the description below and get started with supporting the channel. And in the meantime, let's talk Linux. So, in the same vein as Ubuntu, looking at moving to the v3 of the x86-64 architecture, it looks like Fedora has similar plans as well. Now, it is still a proposal for now, it hasn't been approved, but the idea would be to provide optimized binary packages for recent CPUs when they support the required features. This is already something that Intel's Clear Linux is doing, and it's generally considered a quite speedy distribution, or also it's done in open source Tumbleweed. It would not, in Fedora, prevent older CPUs from getting access to packages. It's just additional support specifically for newer CPUs, which, in my opinion, is the best way of doing things. Because you get a faster system if you have a more recent computer, and you still get support if you want to use Fedora on an older PC. So it's the best of both worlds, and it's the path I hope Ubuntu adopts as well if they want to go that route. And it is always nice to make the most out of your very pricey recent hardware, so I hope we see binary packages optimized specifically for recent CPUs, but I also do hope older computers don't get left behind. Because Red Hat is also eyeing a very similar move, just like Ubuntu or Fedora. But this time it means that you would not be able to run Red Hat Enterprise Linux on computers older than 2015, in order to ensure better performance for newer computers. Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10 is planned for early 2025, and it will already drop X11 in favor of Wayland, meaning there will be a clear cutoff with this version. People with Atom CPUs or older computers, and people who absolutely cannot move to Wayland will be left behind by one of the most popular enterprise distros out there. Red Hat says that even if there are no major performance improvements in this shift, they would still like to do it, as it would mean various developers would only have one baseline platform to handle without having to test if the CPU supports certain extensions and implementing the same features twice for those who have the extensions and for those who don't. And it will be very interesting to see whether Ubuntu does it, whether Red Hat does it, and how Fedora will handle that as well, because that's three very big distributions that could just say, you know what, older computers, nah, we don't want you anymore. And that would be a shame for a lot of Linux users, since one of the best use cases of Linux is to save an older computer from the junkyard. Now, it looks like Linux's desktop market share is still growing. At least if StatCounter is to be believed. This is a site that uses various analytics data from a pretty large sample of websites to provide statistics, including the market share of various operating systems. And in December 2023, it reported Linux as reaching about 4%. This is not a big number, but it's a huge progression compared to November, because at that time it only reported Linux at 3.22%. So this might be an anomaly, but there's no denying that the market share of Linux has risen faster and faster over the years, even though the total number for its market share is still pretty low. And if we add Chrome OS to that number, we reach around 6.24%, which makes me think this might be an issue in how operating systems were counted, because in November, Chrome OS had 3.71% market share, and it dropped down to 2.42% in December. meaning that the sum total of Chrome OS plus Linux has actually dropped down compared to November. Now that's kinda surprising, especially since the Windows market share has also risen a lot and the macOS market share has dipped quite a bit. So maybe it is just students going back home for the holidays and just not using their Chromebooks or Macs and using their Windows computers at home, but it doesn't explain the rise in terms of Linux desktop market share. So I'm not sure what happened here. We'll have to see in the next month if this is confirmed or if it just goes back to where it was in November. Now we need to talk about Mozilla. There's been a lot of stuff going around on their CEO's compensation. I won't get into that because first, I don't know what this type of job entails. Second, it is not rare to see CEOs getting raises even when businesses aren't doing particularly well. And third, if I compare that to CEOs of other similarly sized organizations, it doesn't feel crazy. Even though getting paid multiple $million per year for any type of job has always been completely ridiculous. Whether you're a football player, a basketball player, a TV host, a CEO, whatever, this kind of money should never be the salary for one single person, no matter your job. Now, what I find more interesting about Mozilla is the fact that they seem to want to pivot towards AI, which, well, you know my stance on that. Obviously, Firefox right now is not doing super well. And while Mozilla has managed to increase revenue from other sources to not be solely dependent on Google, the tech giant is still the biggest part of Mozilla's revenue. And so the CEO now said that they want to be faster and make a bigger impact with Mozilla. And this comes as apparently the Mozilla.social instance for the Fediverse will not be moving beyond the current beta or experimental state it's in, at least not in 2024, and they had already started work on an AI chatbot, but they quickly put it on pause because it failed to be pertinent or accurate in testing. So right now, apparently, Mozilla has 15 engineers working on open source large language models, and they're working on use cases in healthcare specifically. Mitchell Baker, the CEO of Mozilla, also said that they need more data to be able to prototype and launch new products, but that they want to do that in a Mozilla way, so hopefully with privacy in mind. And I will admit, I am a bit worried about Mozilla because Firefox is absolutely nosediving and the only product that seems to be doing really well for them these days is Thunderbird. It really had a nice revival with the recent version. And AI, I'm not the biggest fan of. If they do it in a intelligent way where it all runs locally and it's just an accelerator for your browsing, for your own research, and it doesn't give you pre-digested information that is often false, then sure, why not? But it also kind of feels like they're just grasping at the latest trend to try and stay relevant, so I'm not sure where this is going. Now, it looks like GNOME is working on an official extension for the GNOME shell, which is a resource monitor. It just displays some stats for CPU usage, memory, swap, upload and download speeds right next to the quick settings menu. So it's nothing revolutionary. But the fact that it's an official extension developed by the GNOME project is interesting. Now, the rationale behind this is that they used to have this feature way back when GNOME 3 was introduced, and that some distros apparently re-implement their own or the very old extension that existed before. And so since there's apparently some demand for this feature, they have developed their own extension, which shouldn't have the same performance problems that the old version of the extension has. This extension is optional, it won't be shipped as part of the GNOME shell, but it will be available from the GNOME extensions base package or from the extensions manager probably as well. And I will admit I am very confused by this because you already have a system monitor that shows resources, and if people need more than this, why make it an official extension? Why not make it a settings in the GNOME shell to let people turn that on or off? Distributing this as an extension doesn't fix anything because there were already plenty of third-party extensions that did that with more features, more options, and they weren't necessarily bad or badly optimized. And if GNOME is going to start working on new extensions because there's demand for it, there's probably more demand for a lot of other stuff than a system monitor, for example, a system tray or a suitable replacement for that. So I don't really know what's going on here, but it feels kind of weird and I'm really baffled, so let me know if you know what this is all about. Now, still on GNOME, there is some solid progress being made on the various areas that benefited from the big influx of cache that GNOME got, including support for variable refresh rate, more refactoring on the online accounts, and revamped settings for the Orca screen reader. There are also plenty of things being done on documentation, and on improving the GNOME shell theme and scroll bars, and some work is planned to improve accessibility with screen readers on Wayland and with text-to-speech. There were also plenty of updates to the wonderful GNOME apps, for example to Parabolic, Fretboard, Fractal, Denaro, and a lot more. And it's really cool stuff being worked on, actually useful stuff that people requested, so it's good to see that this money is being put to good use so GNOME can be suitable for more people and can also be more accessible to a lot of people. Now, Ubuntu might stop providing their source ISOs in the future. These images are distributed alongside the regular ISO that you use to install Ubuntu, and they contain all the source code for all the packages available for Ubuntu. They are just one way to ensure that everyone can get access to the source code. But apparently they are annoying to build, with the automated process breaking often, and virtually no one ever downloads them since they are pretty huge and you can already get the source code of individual packages from the source repos of Ubuntu. Various Ubuntu flavors also do not have access to the source ISOs, snap packages are not comprised in them, and these images are a fixed snapshot, meaning you don't even get the latest source code in them if you download them after the distro has been released. So, Ubuntu is now pondering discontinuing these ISOs, and I am sure someone will find this unacceptable in one way or the other, but I personally think we have moved past this distribution method a while ago. If you use Ubuntu or Linux in general, you kinda need to have an internet connection, if only to apply updates. And if you do have access to an internet connection, it's gonna be way more efficient to download the source code for just the packages that you actually want from the source repos, rather than downloading giant DVDs full of source that is outdated. So I don't think these source ISOs are needed, and I think the source code from the source repos just fully complies with the GPL, so I don't think they're needed anymore. Of course, there's probably one person somewhere that has a use case for those, but honestly, yeah, just drop them. And let's finish this with the gaming news. So first, Linux gaming has progressed insanely fast in 2023, and it ended the year on a high note by beating its highest market share ever by a tiny little bit. Linux now commands 1.97% of the Steam gaming market, obviously thanks to the Steam Deck, and that is still higher than what macOS has. SteamOS is obviously the most used distro here, with 40% of the Linux piece of the pie. That's still extremely low compared to Windows with its enormous 96.4% of Steam users, and we are very far from overtaking that operating system. But the bigger we get, the more game developers will have an interest in enabling anti-cheat for Linux and at least testing their game with Proton to ensure things work on the deck, meaning that they will also work on other Linux computers. And honestly, if people keep releasing their newer games on macOS right now with the very small market share they have, smaller than Linux's, I'm pretty sure that if we pass 3, 4 or 5%, we're gonna see a lot more support from developers, because if you support Apple with half the market share, you kinda have to support Linux if it makes sense in terms of money. Now, we also have some good news for AMD users. In Mesa 24, the performance for ray tracing will get much better using the RADV driver. This boost goes from 10% to 75% depending on the title on an RX 6700 XT. But if you have a really recent AMD GPU like an RX 7900 XT, then the performance boost can get up to 200%. So yeah, ray tracing on AMD hardware is definitely going to be much more usable on Linux pretty soon, at the end of February probably. And to conclude, the Steam Deck now passed 13,000 titles verified or playable, with about 2/3 being playable and 1/3 verified. 3,720 games are also completely unsupported on deck, and that's a sizable chunk of the Steam library that you can't play, but it is still amazing to see the size of the library we now have on the deck, and on Linux as well, since a lot of these unsupported games would play fine on a more generic Linux PC. And speaking of a more generic Linux PC, let's talk about our sponsor. Tuxedo Computers. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they make laptops, desktops, and NUCs that ship with Linux pre-installed. All the hardware has been picked specifically because it is highly compatible with Linux, so you can either pick a selection of popular distros, or you can just install your own and it's going to work. If they actually encounter problems when testing their devices, they do submit patches upstream to fix those so everyone can benefit. All the devices can be customized with your own keyboard layout, your own logo, and picking the components inside, and you can also open, repair, and upgrade all the laptops that they sell. Tuxedo Computers is all I use these days to run the channel and to game with my SteamOS console, being a Tuxedo desktop PC, a little cube. So if you need a new computer, you want to support Linux's development, and you want to make sure your new PC runs Linux well, click the link in the description and get yourself a computer from Tuxedo. So thanks everyone for watching the video, I hope you enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to like, to subscribe, to turn on notifications, to write a comment, and if you didn't like the video, there's always that thumbs down button and the comment section as well. And if you want to support the channel, I already told you all about that at the beginning of the video, so I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!